I could say something about VMS, which is when I started work. I'll start with VMS because that's Philip and Nelson will join me in on this. When I started work at the Open University, I'm afraid this is being recorded, but I won't get into trouble because I don't work there anymore. It's
which university?
The Open University.
Ah, right. Mm-hmm.
I won't get into trouble because it's a long time ago and I don't work there anymore. But they sort of were early adopters of tech, and they used a DEC Alpha as the hardware and VMS as the operating system. And as things developed, they developed what they needed, and they were able to produce PostScript with images in them and stuff like that. But unfortunately, the whole workflow and stuff was sort of captured by the VMS system, which is quite attractive, I think, in a number of ways. I've used VMS a few times, and it's got a nice feature, particularly for its time. And my job when I was hired was to move the tech system from VMS onto a modern operating system, i.e. Windows. And there were certain sort of features, particularly the graphics drivers, that were not reproducible. The graphic drivers were a bit hard-coded. And so that was the thing I was doing in my first 6 months or so at my job, was moving this whole production system from the Alpha VMS. And they were worried because it was unsupported hardware and unsupported software. And one of my jobs was to listen in on what the graphics drivers was doing and re-implement it using the standard DVI-PS sort of drivers. So that's my encounter with VMS, which was porting something from VMS. And if you, Philip, want to port your stuff from VMS, I might still have some skills that are useful for you. I don't know. But you'll probably have.
I actually do essentially everything on VMS. The one compromise I've made is because the web browsers on VMS are seriously out of date. So I use my iPad as a web browser. But otherwise, I do everything I do on VMS. So I plan to stay there for a while. And a few years ago, a new company bought the rights to VMS and have now ported it to the x86 architecture. So it has a new lease on life.
Oh, that's good.
After Alpha, for a time, Alpha was the fastest chip in the world, and even people who had no familiarity with VMS bought Alphas, maybe even running VMS just to get the speed. And it was around for just a few years, and then it was when first Compaq bought DEC, and then HP bought Compaq, and then they decided to kill Alpha in favor of their Itanium processor, which was intended to become an industry standard and never did. I've never owned an Itanium machine, but I've worked with them, and they're perfectly fine. But of course, they're expensive because they're not commodity hardware. So it's interesting now that VMS is actually being ported to the de facto standard hardware, and we'll see what happens. I don't expect it to replace Linux and Windows, in a storm, but it'll certainly allow it to live on longer than it might have otherwise. And many people from DEC who had retired have been rehired by this new company to get the port done and so on.
I think just 2 days ago, I was wondering if anybody still used VMS, and now I have my answer.
Yes.
I will say I used to have an Alpha desktop machine. I used to work for Alta Vista, the search engine.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
I was an employee there for about 5 years, and I had that, but I ran digital Unix on it, not VMS, I'm embarrassed to say.
It was running on digital Unix, was it?
Unix ran, well, the Alphas ran digital Unix, Windows NT, and VMS, as I recall.
Mm-hmm. For a time, Alta Vista was what Google is today. It was the default search engine.
Yes, they turned down the Google guys when they came to them with their algorithm. which was probably like, what was it, EMI that turned down the Beatles when they came or something? Yeah.
Not EMI, but another company.
Yeah,
they were
whatever.
picked up by EMI. Yeah, yeah. The famous Judgment guitar bands are out.
That's right.